Hi all, Kyber1 here, and today we are doing core rules review on Middle Earth role-playing. This actually uses the Rolemaster system by Iron Crown Entertainment, and so this book really has a special place for me, and it's not because it's the Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Rings became like a default setting, sort of, or a conceptual setting for many fantasy role-playing games. The reason why this holds a special place has nothing to do with Middle Earth, and it has everything to do with the content of its character. So, let's begin. Unfortunately, the build does not hold up that well. You could see a bit of separation after this many years. But this is 1984, so 37 years ago. And everything's broken down into this chapter, subchapter sort of thing with the page number. And I really like that. But the font is extremely tiny in a lot of places. There's over 100 pages here. Not by many, but there are. So you have your introduction. And I'm not going to go through everything because it's honestly a thick book and I don't want to tear it. My concern is for the product at this point, and I don't want to go into too much simply because of the age of the product. So you got the introduction, what is a role-playing game, sample adventure in a fantasy role-playing setting. You have learning to use MERP, definitions and conventions, and honestly, this part right here, non-player character, a being in a fantasy role-playing game whose actions are not controlled by a player, but instead are controlled by the game master. Ta-da! And that's everything you need to know about a non-player character. It doesn't specify how little or much information is needed, and you just know that it's a character in the world, regardless of how many stats or whatever. Dice rolling conventions. Yeah. So this is a D100 system, essentially, with some other rolls that involve D10s. The basic factors defining a character. So you have strength, agility, constitution, intelligence, intuition, and presence. So it's a bit different than D&D. Skill or ability, you have movement and maneuver, no armor and leather, chain and plate, and what governs that. And this is where they really lose some players, honestly, because you have to think about everything. So if you're coming over from wargaming into the fantasy role-playing genre, Rolemaster was excellent because it had that level of depth that you had to consider every little thing. And unfortunately, I haven't been able to play this. But some of my older friends, they would tell me stories about the craziest stuff, and then their game master would remind them of stuff they didn't consider. So, one guy, he was walking through the mud leading his horse, and he's in plate mail. It starts downpouring, and he slips in the mud, and the plate mail starts gathering the dirt and the water and inside, and he's literally about to drown in the mud. And so the other guys, they decide to pull him up using the horse he was trying to walk with. And oh man, he just gets dragged through the mud, and he basically has to try to roll constitution saves to avoid getting knocked out through the mud. And yeah, like that sounded really fun, but not something you'd ever want to go through. But they didn't want to run it because at the time I was like 12 when I first heard about this, and I wasn't very mature, I guess, for this, because you had to consider every little thing like that, like, look, mud is dangerous if you're stupid. So you have your race and culture, and there is a lot to go over. Like, it's one of the best depth factories for Middle Earth. As just, have you ever played Shadow of War or Shadow of Mordor? That doesn't compare to this. Like, you have other factors, and just language is a consideration, and in D&D that doesn't matter as much. And it goes on for a bit. Oh, there we are. See, this is what I'm talking about. This is why I'm concerned. Trying to play it safe to the... Okay, so you have your special racial modifications, language rank table. So how well do you speak the language? Languages of Middle Earth. Skill rank bonuses. I mean, you just have a cool amount of stuff. Like, listen to this skill. Read runes. Use items. Directed spells. Swim. Subterfuge skills. Oh, yeah, that covers ambush and stalk and hide, pick locks and disarm traps. So basically, this sort of system is where I got my personal system. And my personal system, I have the broad category for which it fills, and then people just fill in their specialties. Like, I don't specifically lay out what your skills are. You tell me that, and you explain why they fit into certain categories. Like, for instance, alchemy could either be under crafting or magic, depending on how your variation of alchemy works. Because some people believe it's in crafting, some people believe it's in magic, and if it's under crafting, they believe it's more scientific, and if it's magic, it's more faith-driven. But your character has their own world beliefs. Anyways, back to this. The critical point table. There's a lot of variation here. 5 different types of crits, dependent on your character level and how many points are scored. So, if a 10th level, oh yeah, and then you have each level above 10th, and it's very convoluted. And look at how small this font is again. Okay, so you have the kill point table, which is interesting for Middle Earth. The spell point table, level of the character casting the spell, and the spell level. So, the more powerful you are, The higher your level, 10, and then the spell level, you get better at casting lower level spells, but for whatever reason, the spell points for a first level character casting a 10th level spell is the same as a 10th level character casting a 10th level spell. That's a bit bizarre to me. So you have a bunch of skill bonuses under here and penalties, and you're just like, wow. Okay, so his perception bonus due to helm, his offensive bonuses due to arm greaves, and his movement and maneuver bonuses due to leg greaves are all decreased by 5. Everything must be considered. If you're walking through the mud, okay, you need a maneuver check. And then if you're guiding an animal, that's another type of check. Everything is intense. There's a reason why you can almost drown in mud in Middle Earth. And it's one of those fascinating things, I want to try it sometime, but I would probably be irritated by the level of slowdown. And turn on my laptop. Okay. Creating and molding a character. So, how do you generate statistics? First, the player must generate the stats, which determines his mental and physical prowess. See section 2.11 for the 6 stats. To determine the stats, first make 6 rolls, 1d100 basically, and record them on a piece of paper. Ignore rolls less than 20. You need to roll 6 rolls above 19. Low, assign at your discretion each of the 6 rolls to one of the 6 stats as you see fit, and record them on your character record sheet. You should now have one value between 20 and 100 inclusive for each of your 6 stats. Remember, the higher the stat, the more capable your character will be when performing an action that uses that particular stat. At this point, the normal stat bonuses, see section 2.12, and table BT-1 should also be recorded. Elves have certain advantages over the mortal races, see section 2.21. And in terms of a fantasy role-playing game, this is reflected by a restriction on how they assign their stats. Each Noldor elf must, and I know I'm butchering that. I told you guys, I'm not a very big fan of Middle-earth, so don't expect me to be one. Must assign his highest stat to his presence. Each Sindar elf must assign one of his 2 highest stats to his presence, and each Sylvan elf must assign one of his 3 highest stats to his presence. Keep in mind that when a profession for the character is chosen, see 2.4 and 3.4, the value assigned to the prime stat for the character may be replaced with a value of 90. Thus, it is often a good idea to assign your lowest stat to the prime stat. Wow. That is a lot to read when a table would have sufficed. And they know how to do tables. And they give some good examples in there. Okay, so then you have your race and culture. Once again, they know how to do tables. Adolescent skill development, choosing a profession. So there's a little bit of a life path system. It's not much, but it's the early beginnings of one. And as you can see, you could barely see those staples. They're barely holding on there. Okay. Background options and details. Special items. That's pretty cool. Background options table. There's a lot of character customization in this. And by customization, I mean variation. Development point table. This game was pretty avant-garde. Rating the player character, calculating the encumbrance penalty. Once again, that encumbrance will kill you if you are in mud and you fall on your face. The world system, the Game Master's task. So this is really cool. So the setting, you have civilized areas, you have countryside, you have adventure sites. And under civilized areas, you have maps and layouts, a description of the inhabitants and visitors, a price list of available services, supplies, and equipment, some sort of outline of available information and clues, an outline of available healing and recuperation facilities. Sorry, an outline of possible hazards and adventures. A basic description of the area's current events and mood. Civilized areas. This section should be in every single role-playing game. Pretty much just like this. Because these are the things that even if you're not consciously aware of, you kind of expect as a player. The countryside. These are the 7 things you need for it. A sketch map of the overall world, detailed maps of the specific area in which the adventures occur, the location of civilized areas and adventure sites, sketches of typical terrain that might be encountered, a description of normal creatures and inhabitants, a description of characters and creatures who might pass through, a list of possible encounters and hazards, including weather. Once again, it started raining. My friend almost drowned in the mud because he was wearing plate armor. And it's a fascinating concept. You are so used to being this uber hero after Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition. I mean, in 2nd Edition, you still have the survival thing, but by the time you were 3rd level, you're pretty well off. But in this, you always have that fear of failure. Adventure sites. And then you have 7 things here. Why was this place designed and built originally? What, if anything, has happened to make the place an adventure site? What is the place currently used for? Who or what lives there or visits frequently? The layout and its immediate surrounding area. The hazards, traps, guards, and inhabitants. And any goals or any treasure or goals. And they tell you the tables to look at. Sorry. It's just this little magazine, basically, it has a much better layout than the original first edition AD&D book, as far as like what to expect in the Game Master section, in my personal beliefs, because it really cuts through to like, hey, what are you doing? Where are you at? What sort of things are here? And especially trying to run a game, like, you're thinking about everything else, and the specific 7 questions in the civilized areas, the countryside, and the adventure sites really makes a cutting edge difference, because you need to know what to think about. And when you have 7 questions that need answering, it makes a whole lot more sense to display those questions. And then you have NPCs, hostile populations, inhabitants of adventure sites, and thinking races, flora and fauna, monsters and other creatures. And then you have descriptions of creatures. All Nazgul are capable of using some sort of spells of differing power. That's cool. Like, I just really like this art here, and that's pretty sweet. Like, I miss this style of art. And, like, you just look at this, and it has a more serious tone than the AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide did. And the descriptions over all this stuff is really pretty cool. Because it's one of the things that for D&D went away from. Like 4th edition, there wasn't a description of the monster. And even though there's not a picture for everything, it's just wargs. As the great eagles are greater than the earth eagles, so are wargs greater than normal wolves. Malicious but intelligent, these beasts are large enough to serve as mounts for tribes of orcs they are allied with. So they're intelligent and can be used as mounts. You know a lot about a warg because they're making alliances and they are capable of being rode into battle. Sorry. But you don't need a very lengthy description of anything. Hiring non-player characters. Difficulty: routine, easy, light, medium, hard, very hard, extremely hard, sheer folly, or absurd. And what type of offer are you offering them? It would be absurd to say, come adventure with me. And they let you know that in the book. That's amazing, because in Dungeons and Dragons, how many times does the GM, okay, yeah, they're into it, you know? But in this, they put their foot down and they're like, no, nobody's going to go risk their life to drown in mud with your characters. Magic and spells. I'm going to hurry up. We're into this section kind of deep. Okay, so wand, rod, or staff. Minimum length, 1 foot, 2.5 feet, or 5 feet. Maximum charges, 10, 30, or 100. Maximum spell level, 2nd, 5th, or 10th. And that's pretty cool. They give you very, very detailed information in a little table sort of idea. And that to me matters a whole lot more than non-specific information. Once again, this game is very specific. It will turn a lot of people off. Religion. Middle Earth is a vast continent which is the home of numerous races and cultures. Most have their own gods or gods and have their own set of associated rules and rituals. Many of these religions involve cruel deities and the worship of darkness. Other pantheons reflect some local perception of and belief in some or all of the Valar. I believe those are the elven gods. This is particularly true in northwestern Middle-earth, where the elves and enlightened men know the true nature of those on high. Injury, death, and healing. There's just a lot to this. Okay, you have the weather table. Yay! Rainy. Humid and temperate, wet and dry, arid. Standard precipitation, standard temperatures. Weather. Determine the month. Determine the general climate of the area. Determine the temperature. Determine if there is precipitation, how much and what kind. Poisons, diseases, weather, buying, selling, and money. Yeah, like you have a lot of just a lot of stuff to consider. I don't know why poisons, diseases, and buying and weather go hand in hand, but they do. Oh no, another page that's kind of coming up. Scouting in the countryside, the encounter table. Action in the tactical environment. Sequence of actions. Prepare or cast a spell. Missile and thrown weapon attacks. Missile pairing and loading, reloading. Moving maneuvers. Melee attacks and melee pairing. Movement and static maneuvers. Orientation rolls are used when required by circumstance. I'm glad they specify that. Conflicting actions may modify this sequence. Wow. Once again, there's a lot to consider. Like, there's no generalized initiative. What you're doing determines the order in which you act. Combat is very in-depth. Spells list and record sheets. Ouch. Essence hand, spell ways, spirit mastery, essence ways. I can't go over all these. We're almost at a half hour already. But there are a lot of laws that govern spells. Yeah, we're still in Magic, by the way. Okay, so animal statistic table, and then you have tooth and claw attack table. You have grappling and unbalancing attack table, so tripping. One-handed slashing. Yeah, they have tables for every form of attack that you could possibly want. Weapon statistics table. And then you have your fumble tables. Sorry, shook the camera. Critical table. More critical table. Ball spells attack table. Bolt spells attack table. More critical tables. Base spells attack table. Resistance roll table. Static maneuver table. This is the game of tables. Moving maneuver table. Moving maneuver. I love that. General tables and record sheets. Okay, so equipment and price table, accessories, protective equipment, food and lodging, transport. Overall, this has a far better layout than Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay does. This is a lot easier to read. And I think some aspects of this are better than first edition Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, where other aspects are better than that. So this has a far more concise method for telling you, as a game master, what sort of considerations are you thinking about when you're determining the month, the weather, that sort of thing, the adventure sites. Whereas in that, you have so much more availability and options for the characters. And honestly, they're both kind of D100 systems. Use whichever system you want, but use ideas from both. And then you have your master character table. That's a lot there. Herbs, poisons, and disease table. We're almost done. We're at about the half-hour mark. Treasure table. Money, gems, and jewelry chart. Magic item chart. Create a creature summary table. Normal Middle Earth animals. And then you have the damage record sheet. Experience point record sheet. Now this is cool. You have your character. Who are you? You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 slots. Hit points, total hits taken. Critical points, opponent's level and severity of critical. Kill points, opponent's level and character's level. Maneuver points, difficulty of maneuver. Spell points, spell level and character level. Miscellaneous points. Travel points, number of miles traveled. Subtotal. Idea points, half of the group's total points. And total. So that's how you gain your experience in this game. Everything's being tracked constantly. I can see this as a massive slog. Like, the youngest person I could see playing this that I've ever met is probably like 15. And he was most likely to run it, because that's the sort of in-depth analysis. Like, I don't have patience for that level of detail because it drags the game down. Like, if I have 4 hours to play, and if 3 hours of it are record keeping, no thank you. A sample game environment. And then you have adventure sites. And that's pretty cool. Like, you have more stuff. But Ruined Castle, the Castle Keep. Okay. So you have a lot of content in this small book. If you can find the PDF, I highly Ow, wrong tube. I highly recommend it, because this is a complete system for adventuring. Take what you want from this, because you are playing your game. And as I said, this is a gem not because it's Middle Earth, but because of the content, like underlying the way the monsters are described. You're not worried about stats as much. You're worried about the functionality of the creatures. You are worried about, like, how does one tooth compare to another? Well, now you know. There's a table and chart for that. You are worried about the weather, the adventure, the conditions. 7 questions for civilization, the wilderness, and adventure sites. And there's something about that, the simplicity that is offered in this book about adventure creation, but somehow it being convoluted with the most overbearing charts and processes for doing the simplest of actions. It's simply befuddling, because it was so far ahead of its time in the considerations for what we're thinking about as we're doing what we're doing. Yet it was stuck in the past with the idea that if you're not using the book at the table, then you're not really playing the game. And that, to me, is a fascinating piece of history. Highly recommended. Try to find this online. I think DriveThruRPG might have a copy for cheap. I was lucky. I found this recently for $5. I don't know if my older friends still have their copies of this, but Rolemaster and Ice, they definitely had the right idea in some aspects, and they were definitely married to the Middle Earth role-playing system. All right, Caraburn One out. Like and subscribe. Thank you very much for checking this out. And I'll see you guys probably next Saturday.